A celebration without dessert is just a meeting, Eva said with a smile, pushing the menu aside. And today, we're celebrating. Alan laughed. In her dazzling yellow dress, she glowed, and the light seemed to come not from the fabric, but from within. At that moment, her gaze happened to sweep across the room and froze. Marcus, her ex-husband, was sitting at a table by the window. A second later, he also looked up, and their eyes met. His fork froze halfway to his mouth, his face contorted with shock. He looked at her as if he had seen a ghost, a beautiful, living, shining ghost, from the life he had cowardly abandoned. Eva, on the other hand, did not flinch. She held his gaze and after a long pause gave him a slight, barely noticeable smile, full of quiet strength. She slowly turned to Alan, who had noticed this silent duel. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said quietly. Eva covered his hand with hers, and her eyes shone with warmth again. "On the contrary," she replied, "I just realized that all ghosts are in the past." Marcus remained seated, crushed, looking at the woman he no longer recognized and the happiness that could have been his. Just a year ago, their life had also seemed perfect. They stood in the living room of their home, designed by Eva, and welcomed guests. Marcus, hugging her waist, proudly said, "My wife is a genius. She doesn't create houses, she creates dreams." Their world seemed unshakable until one phone call from the clinic shattered it into pieces. Marcus's first reaction was shock, mixed with denial. "This must be some kind of mistake," he repeated in the car on the way home. "Doctors are always wrong. You're just exhausted from your latest project." But when the diagnosis was confirmed, denial gave way to fear, and fear gave way to cold detachment. He began to avoid her. One evening, Eva was sitting on the couch, sorting through brochures from the clinic. "Marcus, look, there are support groups here, and yoga classes for patients. Maybe I should try it?" she asked hopefully. Without looking up from his laptop screen, he said over his shoulder, "Eva, don't be silly. What groups? Those are for broken people. You're strong, you can handle it yourself." He didn't want to see her weak. He didn't want to see her sick. He wanted everything to go back to the way it was as soon as possible. But he did nothing to make that happen. The end came on one of those gray, rainy days. Eva, pale and exhausted after her first round of chemotherapy, was sitting in the living room. She had just finished a difficult phone call with a client who had to give up her project. At that moment, Marcus came out of the bedroom with a suitcase. He stopped in the doorway, not daring to come closer. "Marcus? What's going on? Where are you going?" she whispered. He couldn't bring himself to look her in the eye. His gaze was fixed somewhere on the wall above her head. "I'm sorry, I can't do this. I didn't sign up for this." He left without looking back, leaving her alone in their perfect home, alone with her pain, fear, and deafening silence. When the click of the lock behind Marcus announced his departure, Eva sat motionless for several more minutes. The silence that descended on the house was absolute, deafening. She walked over to the kitchen island to pour herself some water, but her hands were shaking so much that the glass slipped and shattered on the tile floor with a deafening clang. She just stared at the shards, unable to move. A few days later, she tried to return to some semblance of normal life and went to the supermarket. But the bright lights, cheerful music, and people scurrying around with full shopping carts all seemed like decorations for someone else's holiday. When she saw a young couple laughing as they chose wine, something inside her snapped. She dropped her half-empty cart right in the middle of the aisle and, barely holding back her sobs, ran out to the parking lot. Her home, her fortress, had become her prison. The phone was ringing off the hook. Finally, she answered her best friend, Anna. "Eva, thank God, I'm going crazy. What's going on? Why aren't you answering? Marcus said you were just tired and didn't want to see anyone." "Marcus?" Eva asked quietly. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes, I called him yesterday. He's on some urgent business trip. He said everything was fine with you." "Eva, I know that's not true. I can hear it in your voice. What really happened?" Eva was silent for so long that Anna decided the connection had been lost. "He left, Anna," she finally blurted out, and the dam she had been building for so long collapsed. "He just packed his suitcase and left. I'm coming, Anna snapped. No, please don't, Eva begged. I can't see anyone. I need to be alone. She hung up, leaving her friend confused. Emotional pain was compounded by practical problems. Bills from the clinic began to arrive. While trying to figure out how to pay them through online banking, she stumbled upon a notification that access to their joint account, where most of their savings were kept, had been blocked for her. This cold, soulless digital blow was almost as painful as his last words. One evening, unable to stay in the living room any longer, she went up to their bedroom. His expensive watch was still on the dressing table, his suit hanging on the hanger. She walked over to the large mirror and looked closely at her reflection for the first time in many days. A strange woman, with pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, and a completely bald head, stared back at her. She touched the smooth skin of her skull, and at that moment, her self-pity gave way to cold, clear anger. She spun around and opened the closet. Taking out a large empty suitcase, she began to throw Marcus's things into it with fierce methodicalness. His suits, shirts, expensive watches. She saw a photograph of them in a silver frame on the bedside table, smiling happily against the backdrop of the sunset. She picked it up, looked into the eyes of her smiling self, and threw the frame into the suitcase with a swing. The glass cracked. When she was done, she struggled to drag the heavy suitcase out of the bedroom and left it by the front door like unwanted luggage. She didn't know yet what she would do next, but that evening she took the first step. She put the past outside the door of her home and her life. A week had passed since Marcus's suitcase disappeared from the doorstep. Eva didn't know who had taken it, whether it was him who had come secretly or a courier, and she didn't want to know. This act of expulsion brought her no relief, only emptiness. The anger subsided, leaving behind only the hollow silence of the huge house. She had an appointment at the clinic for a routine checkup and to schedule the next stage of treatment. The mere thought of leaving the house, getting in the car, and driving to the place where she had received the terrible news made her feel nauseous. But the calendar on the wall was a relentless reminder of the date. On the appointed morning, she forced herself to get up with difficulty. Putting on loose pants and a soft cashmere sweater, she walked over to the mirror. From the many beautiful silk scarves she had bought after starting chemotherapy, Eva chose the most neutral, beige one, and carefully tied it around her head. She didn't want to attract attention, dreaming of becoming invisible. The clinic lobby was crowded and noisy. Eva felt uncomfortable, catching the sympathetic glances of other visitors. She approached the reception desk, gave her name, and prepared for a long wait. But the administrator, a young girl with kind eyes, looked at her with special attention. Mrs. Eva Stone? One moment, please. The girl disappeared behind a door marked Doctor's Office and returned a moment later with an elderly doctor, Dr. Henderson, who had been treating her from the beginning. Eva, dear, hello, he said, gently taking her by the arm. Let's go to my office. We need to talk. Eva's heart skipped a beat. An unplanned conversation with the doctor did not bode well. In his office, Doctor Henderson sat her down in a chair and sat down opposite her. How are you feeling, Eva? Physically, as usual after the procedure. Weakness, nausea. I'm coping, she replied in an even voice. Good. And mentally? He looked at her over his glasses. I'm coping too, she lied. Dr. Henderson sighed. Eva, we've had some changes at the clinic. We're expanding the oncology department and have brought in a new head, one of the best specialists in the field. He's reviewing all the complex cases, and he wants to take you on personally. Eva looked at him, confused. But I thought you... I'm staying, of course, he smiled, but your case requires the most advanced approach. Dr. Alan Blackwood is a world-renowned surgeon and oncologist. Believe me, you will be in the most capable hands. He is already waiting for you. His office is in the new wing. The news stunned her. Changing doctors in the middle of treatment seemed like a bad sign to her. She expected to see a cold, arrogant genius for whom she would be just another entry in a medical record. Dr. Blackwood's office was strikingly different from Dr. Henderson's. It was spacious and bright, with a panoramic window overlooking a well-kept courtyard. Instead of stacks of medical journals, there were several abstract paintings on the walls. The owner of the office stood by the window with his back to the door. Hearing footsteps, he turned around. Alan Blackwood was a tall, fit man of about 45, with piercing gray eyes and a calm, confident face. He did not have a trace of the fussiness or arrogance she had expected to see. "Ava, come in. Have a seat." His voice was deep and even. He pointed to a comfortable armchair and sat down, not at the massive desk, but on a chair next to it, creating an atmosphere of equal dialogue. "I've been told you'll be my doctor now," she began, feeling awkward. "Yes," he nodded. "I've studied your medical history, all your tests and treatment protocols. From a medical point of view, I understand everything, but I would like to hear your story, not as a patient, but as a person." This question caught her off guard. "My story, I don't think that's relevant." "It's directly relevant," he gently objected. "Illness affects not only the body, but also the spirit, and both need to be treated. Tell me about yourself, Eva. What do you live for? What do you love?" She was at a loss for words. What did she love? She used to love her job, her home, her morning coffee with Marcus, traveling. Now all of that seemed like someone else's life. "I'm an architect," she finally said. His eyes softened. "An architect. That's wonderful. You create strong, beautiful, and functional things out of chaos. You give people homes where they feel safe." He paused, then said something that made her look at her situation in a new light. "Your body right now is also a project, the most important one of all. The structure has been damaged, but the foundation remains, and we will rebuild it together. I am like a contractor, with all the necessary tools and knowledge, and you are like the chief architect, whose will and decisions determine the final result." He spoke so simply and figuratively that her fear receded for a moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt not pity, but interest in herself. "What if the architect is tired and doesn't want to build anything anymore?" she asked quietly. "Every architect has crises," he replied calmly, "but then he finds a new source of inspiration and creates his best masterpiece." He opened the folder with her documents. "I want to change your treatment plan a little. Add a new drug that has shown excellent results in similar cases. It can cause stronger side effects, but the return on it is much higher. Are you ready for this?" "Do I have a choice?" she asked with bitter irony. "There is always a choice," Alan replied seriously. "Medicine is not a dictatorship. I can only suggest and recommend. The decision is always yours. But I believe that this path will give us the best chance for a complete and unconditional victory." The word victory sounded so confident that something stirred in Ava's heart. She looked up at him. "Okay, I agree. Excellent," he said, closing the folder. "That's all for today. The nurse will schedule you for your next procedure. And one more thing." He took a small, beautifully bound book from the shelf. "This has nothing to do with medicine. It's just a collection of poems. Sometimes a few right words help better than pills. Take it." Eva took the book uncertainly. She left his office in complete confusion. In 20 minutes, this man had done what no one else could. He didn't pity her. He didn't promise miracles. He simply restored her self-esteem and offered to be her partner in her own struggle. Stepping out into the hallway, she saw an elderly woman smiling as she came out of the office next door. Seeing the book in Eva's hands, the woman winked at her. "Oh, you got the special prescription from Dr. Blackwood. He's the best, girl. You can't go wrong with him." Eva smiled back, sincerely for the first time in weeks. Getting into her car, she didn't drive home right away. She stopped at a small park, opened the book, and read the first poem she came across. Then she took out her phone and called Anna. "Hi, Anna. Can you come over? I need to tell you something." It was the second step, and it was much more confident than the first. Anna arrived that same evening, rushing into the house like a little hurricane, with bags full of fresh pastries and fruit. She froze in the doorway when she saw Marcus's suitcase by the door. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked quietly, her cheerful mood instantly evaporating. Ava simply nodded. Anna put the bags on the floor and hugged her friend tightly. "Tell me everything." They sat in the kitchen until late at night. Ava, for the first time in all this time, spoke her mind. She told everything. About Marcus's coldness, about his last words, about the deafening silence after he left. She spoke evenly, almost without emotion, as if she were telling someone else's story. Anna listened, her face growing darker and darker. When Eva finished, she was silent for a few seconds, then slammed her fist on the table with all her might. What a coward. A pathetic, worthless coward. To leave you at a time like this. I can't find the words. I'll find him, and tell him exactly what I think of him. Don't, Anna, Eva pleaded wearily. It won't change anything. He made his choice. Now I have to make mine. And what is that? Lie down and die to spite him? Anna asked sharply. No. Eva looked at her friend, and for the first time in a long time, a determined gleam appeared in her eyes. Live. Live to spite him. She told Anna about the new doctor, his strange conversation about architecture, and the book of poems. Anna listened, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Wow, your Dr. Blackwood isn't so simple. It seems he knows what he's doing, so are you going to fight? I'm going to build, Eva corrected her. I'm going to rebuild my project. The new course of treatment turned out to be exactly as Alan had warned. Brutal. The procedures lasted several hours, and afterward Eva felt completely exhausted. The drug that was injected into her veins was like liquid fire, burning away not only the disease but also the last of her strength. During one of these procedures, as she lay in the chair, staring at the ceiling and trying to meditate to cope with the nausea, Alan entered the room. He was wearing a white coat, but he didn't look like a doctor on rounds. How's the foundation laying going? He asked quietly, sitting down on a chair nearby. The foundation is cracking at the seams, Eva whispered without opening her eyes. The contractor obviously skimped on the cement. Alan smiled. It's not skimping, it's a strength test. Every great building starts with soil testing. Tell me about your latest project. That cultural center on the waterfront. I've seen it in photos, it's impressive. Especially how you've integrated it into the old landscape. Eva struggled to focus her gaze. It was hard to speak, but she forced herself. The main idea was not to disrupt the harmony, to preserve the old trees, the view of the river. The building seems to grow out of the hill, rather than way down on it. The glass and concrete look light, almost weightless, he continued her thought. That's a deceptive impression. Behind it lies a complex load calculation. Strength is often hidden behind outward fragility, Eva. Remember that. He sat with her for almost an hour. They talked about architecture, contemporary artists, his passion for sailing. He never once asked how she was feeling. He was just there, talking to her as an equal, an interesting conversation partner. And that was a distraction, helping her more than any painkillers. As he was leaving, he paused in the doorway. By the way, that collection of poems, read page 47. I think you'll like it. That night she felt particularly bad. The house seemed huge and empty. Pain and weakness came in waves. She lay in bed, curled up in a ball, and for the first time in a long time, she wanted Marcus to be there. Not the one who had left, but the one from before, who could just hug her and say that everything would be okay. She almost gave in to despair, but then she remembered Alan's words. Strength hides behind outward fragility. She forced herself to get up, walk to the living room, and take a book from the shelf. Opening to page 47, she read a short poem about an old tree that had survived 100 storms because its roots were deeply embedded in the ground. Eva returned to bed. The pain hadn't gone away, but the loneliness had receded. She realized that she too had roots, her talent, her friends, her will, and she would hold on to them, no matter what. In the morning, still weak, she did something she hadn't done in months. She took out her old sketchbook and pencil. Her hand trembled, but she drew the first line. It was the horizon line, the line that always starts a new project. 2 months passed. 2 months of hard, exhausting struggle, consisting of IVs, pills, and endless tests. But something had changed. The horizon line that Eva had drawn in her album began to fill with details. At first, they were timid sketches, then more confident drawings. She worked in fits and starts, in those rare hours when the nausea receded and her mind cleared. She wasn't designing for clients, she was designing for herself. a small, secluded house on a rocky seaside cliff, which she and Marcus had once dreamed of. But now there was no room for two in this project. It was a space for one, filled with light, air, and silence. The work became her meditation, her way of bringing order to the chaos. At her next appointment with Alan, she felt a little better. He studied the results of her latest tests carefully, and Eva noticed the corners of his mouth twitch slightly in a smile. "Well, architect," he said, putting the papers aside, "it looks like our foundation has not only stood the test, but has begun to strengthen. The dynamics are very good. Your indicators have improved significantly." Eva listened to him, afraid to believe it. It means we're on the right track," he finished. "The treatment is working. We're not at the finish line yet, but we're definitely on a level stretch of road. How are you feeling overall?" He asked the question carefully, making it clear that he wasn't just referring to her physical condition. "I'm drawing," she replied simply. "Drawing?" he asked with genuine interest. "Can I see?" She hesitated for just a second. Then she took her sketchbook out of her bag and handed it to him. He began to slowly flip through the pages, his face becoming more and more serious and focused. He looked at her sketches, not as an amateur, but as someone who understood lines and shapes. "This is powerful," he finally said, closing the album. "Very honest. There is a lot of pain here, but even more light. You are not just building a house, you are building a new self. And I must say, your project is impressive." His words, his professional and at the same time human assessment of her work, meant more to her than any medical prognosis. "You know," he continued, returning the album to her, "I often see people who, when faced with illness, withdraw into themselves. They build walls around themselves to protect themselves from pain and pity. But you are doing the opposite. You are building something that is open to the world. You turn your experience into something creative." He paused, then looked her straight in the eye and said, "Have you ever thought about sharing this?" "Sharing? With whom?" she asked, not understanding. "Your drawings?" "No. Your story. Your thoughts. How an architect rebuilds his life when the supporting structures collapse." "Are you suggesting I go to a support group?" she asked doubtfully. "No. I'm suggesting you start your own. An informal one. In the space where millions of people communicate today, on the internet, start an anonymous blog." Eva looked at him in bewilderment. "A blog? Why? So the whole world knows how bad I feel? So anonymous users feel sorry for me? So that those who are feeling as bad as you did can understand that they are not alone?" He gently corrected her. "So that they can see that it is possible not just to survive, but to build. You have no idea how many people this could help. You're not going to write about illness, you're going to write about strength, about how to find a new project when the old one has collapsed. Call it something like Project Rebirth. Think about it. This isn't medical advice, it's just a thought out loud." That evening, Eva sat in front of her laptop. She couldn't get the idea of a blog out of her head. At first it seemed wild, ridiculous. Put her pain on display? But then she remembered those early days. The suffocating loneliness. The feeling that she was the only person on the planet going through such a nightmare. If she had stumbled upon someone else's story similar to hers back then, would it have made it easier for her? Definitely. She opened a simple blogging platform and created a page. Her hands trembled as she typed the title, Project Rebirth. She stared at the blank white page for a long time, not knowing where to start, and then the words came on their own. She didn't write about the diagnosis or the betrayal. She wrote about silence, about how deafening it can be when life leaves the house, about how she is learning to listen to it again and find in it not emptiness, but space for something new. The text turned out to be short, just a few paragraphs. She reread it, clicked publish, and immediately slammed her laptop shut, frightened by her own courage. A week passed. She didn't open her blog, afraid to see either emptiness or angry comments there. But curiosity got the better of her. With trembling fingers, she entered the page. There were 3 comments under her post. The first was from a woman who wrote, Thank you. I thought I was the only one who heard this silence. Today, for the first time in a long time, I opened the window. The second was from a man. My wife is going through this right now. I didn't know how to talk to her. Now I think I'm starting to understand. I'll just sit with her in silence. The third was very short. Hang in there. You have a beautiful style. Ava read these few lines, and tears ran down her cheeks. But these were not tears of pain or pity. They were tears of empathy. She was not alone. Her story, her pain, clothed in words, had found a response. She reached out into the darkness, and someone shook her hand in return. That evening, she wrote her second post. About roots, about an old tree. The blog, Project Rebirth, became a lifeline and a window to the world for Eva. She wrote 2 or 3 times a week, turning her fears, hopes, and small victories into short, poignant essays. She wrote about how she was relearning to taste food after chemotherapy, comparing it to tuning a complex musical instrument. She wrote about the strange feeling of freedom that comes with losing your hair, no more time spent on styling, and the wind feels completely new on your scalp. She illustrated her posts with her own sketches, a horizon line, a lone tree, a drawing of an imaginary house on the shore. Her anonymous page began to take on a life of its own. The number of subscribers grew every day. In the comments, people shared their stories, supported each other, and asked questions. Ava realized that she had created not just a blog, but an entire community of people united by a common misfortune, but not broken by it. She stopped feeling lonely. Every morning she woke up thinking not only about the upcoming procedures, but also about the fact that she needed to respond to dozens of comments, support someone, share a new thought. This gave her days meaning and structure. Meanwhile, the treatment continued, and the day of the decisive examination arrived. She was scheduled for a full tomography scan, which was supposed to show how her body had responded to the aggressive therapy. The fear that she thought she had already conquered returned with an icy grip. She had not slept all night, and in the morning, sitting in the clinic corridor waiting for her turn, she felt panic rising in her throat. She took out her phone and wrote a short blog post. Today is an important day, the day when the architects see if the foundation has held. It's a little scary to stand on the threshold. Keep your fingers crossed for me. Within minutes, dozens of comments appeared under the post. We're with you. Everything will be fine. Our architect builds the strongest buildings. We're not just keeping our fingers crossed, but everything we can. Reading these messages from complete strangers, Eva felt a rush of warmth. She was not alone. An entire army of invisible allies was by her side. The results were to be ready in 2 days. Those 48 hours were the longest of her life. Finally, the clinic called. She was invited to see Dr. Blackwood. She sat in his office, in the same chair as the first time, and looked at his inscrutable face. He silently studied the images displayed on the large screen on the wall. Well, doctor, she couldn't help asking, can my project be put into operation, or is it subject to demolition? Alan slowly turned to her. A barely noticeable but very warm smile played on his face. I would say that the project is not just ready to be put into operation, it can be nominated for a prestigious award. He pointed with a laser pointer at the image. Look, here, and here were the main hotspots. And now, it's clean. Completely clean. Ava, you're in remission. The word remission sounded like a starting pistol announcing the beginning of a new life. Eva covered her face with her hands, trying to hold back the sobs that were bursting out. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and accumulated fatigue. Alan waited until she calmed down a little, then approached and handed her a glass of water. This is a great victory, Ava. Your victory. You are an amazing fighter. We are, she whispered, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. We are amazing fighters. Thank you, Alan. She called him by his first name for the first time, and it sounded so natural. The line between doctor and patient became very thin at that moment. What now? She asked, taking a sip of water. Now it's recovery, he replied, more formally. The next few months will be devoted to rehabilitation. Your body is exhausted. It needs time to recover. No stress, proper nutrition, light physical activity. And regular checkups, of course. We have to be on our guard. I understand, she nodded. I'll be a good girl. As she was about to leave, he stopped her. Ava, my charity foundation is having a small reception in a month. A private dinner for trustees and patrons. These are people who donate huge sums of money to research and support clinics like ours. They're used to listening to reports and looking at graphs. But I would like them to hear a real-life story. A story not about illness, but about strength. Not about statistics, but about a person. She looked at him, already guessing where he was going with this. You want me to speak? She asked in horror. I just want you to tell them what you write about in your blog. No drama, no tears. Just be honest and simple. Tell them how an architect is rebuilding her life. But I'm not a public person, and my blog is anonymous. I'm not ready. A light fuzz had already appeared on her head, a harbinger of future hair, but she still felt vulnerable, unattractive, sick. The thought of appearing in front of dozens of rich, successful people looking like this terrified her. You don't have to pretend to be anything, Alan said gently. Just be yourself. The one who writes these amazing texts. Think about it. It could help us raise funds for new equipment, so that there can be more victories like yours. He handed her a beautiful cardboard card, an official invitation. It's up to you, Chief Architect, he added with a smile. Eva left the clinic with the invitation in her hand. She had defeated her illness, but now she faced a new, equally difficult task: to overcome her fear and accept her new self. The dinner invitation lying on the kitchen table seemed to Ava to be both a trophy and a time bomb. She looked at the elegant embossed cardboard and felt two people fighting inside her. One was a tired fighter who wanted only one thing: to hide in her quiet home and lick her wounds. The other was the architect to whom Alan had extended his hand on the first day, who wanted to accept the challenge and complete her main project. She called Anna. He invited me to speak at some fancy dinner for his foundation, Ava began without preamble, to tell my story. Wow, Anna whistled on the other end of the line. That's serious. What did you say? Nothing. I asked for some time to think about it. Anya, I can't do it. Can you imagine? I'll go on stage, looking like this, with 3 hairs on my head, pale, skinny, and in the audience, there will be all these perfect women in diamonds. They'll look at me with pity. Okay, stop, her friend interrupted decisively. First of all, you're not like that. You're a rock star who defeated Godzilla. Secondly, why should you care how people look at you? You're not going there for compliments. You're going there to show them all what real power is. This is the final stage of your project, Eva. You built the walls and the roof, and now you need to cut the ribbon. You have to do it. I have nothing to wear, Ava stammered, using her last weakest argument. Now that's a constructive conversation, Anna said happily. I'll pick you up at 11 tomorrow. We'll go on a total shopping spree. And no compromises. Eva sighed, but deep down she felt relieved. The decision had been made for her. The next day, the shopping trip turned into a real ordeal. In the reflections of the shop windows, Ava saw not herself, but a pale shadow in a headscarf. All the dresses seemed foreign to her, too bright, too bold for her new, fragile state. Maybe something dark? She asked Anna hopefully, twirling an elegant but boring black dress in her hands. No way, Anna snapped. Black is the color of the past, the color of illness. You need the color of life, the color of victory. At that moment, Ava saw it. It hung on a separate mannequin and burned like the sun, a bright yellow dress with a simple but perfect cut. It was so bold, so uncompromising that it took her breath away. There it is, whispered Anna, following her gaze. Your color. It's too loud, Eva said doubtfully. It's just right, her friend insisted. Go and try it on. Right now, in the fitting room, after taking off her scarf and being alone with her reflection, Eva almost backed out. But then she put on the dress. And a miracle happened. The fabric fit perfectly, and the bright color, in some incredible way, did not emphasize her paleness, but on the contrary made her skin glow from within. Suddenly she saw not a sick woman, but simply a woman, fragile but strong, with huge eyes and sparse hair on her head, which made her look like an elf. She came out of the fitting room. Anna gasped, "Ava, you look beautiful." At that moment, Ava realized that this was not just a dress. It was her new armor. A few days before the event, the phone rang. It was Alan. "Ava, hello? This isn't about a medical issue," he said, a slight awkwardness in his voice. "I thought maybe we could have a coffee. I wanted to discuss a couple of details about the upcoming evening, in an informal setting." They met at a small coffee shop in the city center. He didn't come in a white coat, but in a simple sweater and jeans, and Ava suddenly saw him in a completely different light. Not as an all-powerful doctor, but as an ordinary, very attractive man. "I'm worried you'll change your mind," he admitted honestly when their coffee arrived. "I'm worried about that too," she smiled, "but my friend said it's too late to back out." "Your friend is a wise woman," Alan smiled. "I read your blog yesterday. The post about old photos, it was very powerful. You're a real writer. I'm just an architect who describes the renovation process." She shrugged, feeling herself blush at his praise. They talked for over 2 hours. She told him about her blog community, about the people who write to her, and he told her why he started the foundation. A few years ago, he lost his younger sister to cancer. She was an artist, as bright and full of life as that yellow dress. "She fought until the end," he said quietly, looking out the window. But back then, we didn't have the technology, the drugs that we have now. I promised myself that I would do everything I could to give others a better chance than she had. So thank you, Eva. By helping us, you are helping people like her." This conversation finally broke down the wall between them. She saw his pain, and he saw her strength. When they said goodbye, he held her hand in his for a moment longer than politeness required. "I'll be waiting for your triumph, architect," he said. On the day of the reception, Ava felt a nervous tremor running through her body from the morning. She took the last step towards her transformation. She went to the best salon in town. "I want you to do something bold with this," she said to the stylist, pointing to her short, spiky hair. An hour later, she looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The stylist had created a stylish, slightly tousled pixie cut that complemented her large eyes and delicate features. She looked like a French actress. That evening, as she put on her yellow dress, she no longer felt afraid. She looked at her reflection and saw a woman she respected. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Alan stood on the threshold in an impeccable tuxedo. He looked at her, and there was such sincere admiration in his eyes that Eva finally stopped worrying. "Eva," was all he could say. You're glowing." "It's the dress," she tried to joke. "No," he replied seriously, offering her his hand. "It's you." The charity event was held in an old mansion that had been converted into a contemporary art gallery. High ceilings, white walls hung with huge bright canvases. All this created a feeling of space and light that Ava, as an architect, appreciated so much. The guests gathered in the hall were the embodiment of success. Elegant ladies in designer dresses, respectable men in expensive suits. Their quiet conversations and restrained laughter created a backdrop against which Ava, in her yellow dress, looked like an exotic flower. When she and Alan entered, all eyes turned to them. Ava felt curious, appraising glances on her, and for a moment instinctively wanted to hide behind Alan's back. But he just squeezed her elbow encouragingly, and she forced herself to straighten her shoulders and walk forward, with her head held high. They approached a group of people, among whom Ava recognized the mayor and a well-known patron of the arts. Alan introduced her. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Ava Stone. Ava is an outstanding architect and a very courageous person." "It's a pleasure," smiled the mayor's wife, glancing quickly at Eva's haircut. "We admire the work of your foundation, Alan, and we are always happy to support your endeavors." Ava understood that for them she was just another case, a patient whom doctor. Blackwood had decided to make the face of his evening. She was not offended, but calmly answered polite questions, feeling like an exhibit at a fair. An hour later, after the aperitif, the guests were invited to take their seats at the tables. Alan, as the head of the foundation, took to a small stage. He spoke briefly and to the point. He thanked those gathered for their support and talked about the new equipment that had been purchased thanks to their donations. Numbers and reports are important, he said at the end of his speech, but behind every number is a human life. A story of struggle and hope. Today we have with us a person whose story speaks louder than any report. She doesn't like to be called a patient. She prefers to be called an architect, because that's what she's been doing for the past few months, rebuilding her life. Please welcome Eva Stone. The audience applauded politely. Eva took a deep breath and walked to the stage. Her legs felt like cotton wool. Climbing the steps, she stood behind the lectern and looked out into the hall. Dozens of faces, illuminated by spotlights, looked at her with polite curiosity. She saw Alan, who was sitting in the front row, and nodded encouragingly to her. She was about to read the prepared text in front of her, but suddenly realized she couldn't do it. These dry, carefully chosen words seemed false to her. She pushed the sheets of paper aside and simply began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, but with each sentence it grew more confident. Good evening. Dr. Blackwood called me an architect, and that is true. All my life I have built houses for other people. I thought about the strength of structures, the light in the windows, the harmony of forms. I thought I knew everything about foundations. And then a crack appeared in the foundation of my own world, and everything I had built began to crumble. She wasn't talking about illness, diagnosis, or treatment. She was speaking in metaphors from her blog. When your house collapses, at first you experience shock and despair. You sit on the ruins and don't understand how to live on. There is silence around you, and that silence is the most frightening thing. But then, if you listen carefully, you can understand that it is not the silence of death, it is the silence of a construction site. Space has been freed up for a new project. The room became completely silent. Everyone listened, holding their breath. You start small. You clear away the rubble. You throw away what can't be saved. It's painful, but necessary. Then you draw the first line, the line of a new horizon. And gradually, brick by brick, you begin to build new walls. They may not be the same as before. Maybe there will be fewer windows looking out onto the past, but they will definitely have more light, because you decide where your new sun will rise. She spoke of fear, but not as an enemy, but as a material from which courage can be built. She spoke of loneliness, but not as emptiness, but as a space for getting to know yourself. My new project is not yet complete, she concluded, her eyes shining as she looked around the room. But I know for sure that it will be the most beautiful of all that I have ever created, because I am building it not with concrete and glass, but with the will to live. Thank you. The pause lasted only a second, and then the hall erupted in applause. It was not polite clapping. People applauded standing up, and in their eyes Eva saw not pity, but sincere, deep admiration. People approached her, shook her hand, and expressed their gratitude. My father went through this, a distinguished gray-haired man told her. Thank you for finding such the right words. You are an incredible woman, echoed an elegant lady. Eva stepped down from the stage and was immediately met by Alan. He said nothing, just took her hands, but she could read everything in his eyes. At that moment she felt like more than just a winner. She felt alive. They were among the last to leave the reception. Alan insisted on taking a walk through the city at night. They walked through the deserted streets, and for the first time in a long time, Eva felt not tired, but energized. You were magnificent, he said, breaking the silence. It was the first time he had addressed her informally. You made them think, not sympathize. It's all you, she replied. You taught me to speak this language. They stopped at the waterfront. The river lapped quietly against the granite, reflecting the lights of the city. You know, my sister painted until the very last day, Alan said quietly. Her paintings became brighter and brighter, as if she wanted to pour all the light she had inside her onto the canvas. Looking at you today, I thought of her. You, too, are turning your struggle into art. He turned to her, and their eyes met. There was no longer any professional distance in his eyes, only warmth and something else, something deeper. "I'm so glad you came into my life, Eva." He leaned down slowly and very gently, almost weightlessly, touched her lips with his. It was not a passionate kiss, but an incredibly tender one that contained everything: respect, admiration, and the promise of something new and real. When he pulled away, Eva looked at him, unable to say a word. She simply took his hand, and they walked on, no longer as doctor and former patient, but as two people who had found kindred spirits in each other on the ruins of the past. That evening on the embankment became a point of no return for them. The professional relationship that had begun in the sterile silence of the hospital walls had grown into something much deeper and more real. Alan and Eva began to build their own project, the foundation of which was not pity and gratitude, but absolute respect and kindred spirits. Alan turned out to be not only a brilliant doctor, but also a surprisingly subtle and erudite conversationalist. They could walk for hours in the park discussing new literature or argue about the merits of modern architecture while sitting in a small coffee shop. He never reminded her of her illness or looked at her with apprehension, as some of her old acquaintances did. To him, she was not a former patient, but an equal partner, a strong, talented, and incredibly interesting woman. Eva, in turn, discovered a new Alan. She saw the passion with which he spoke about his foundation's work, how his eyes lit up when he talked about new treatments that could save someone's life. She realized that his calmness and confidence were not the mask of a cold professional, but the result of enormous inner strength and belief in his work. She no longer lived in her house as if it were a refuge. She filled it with life again. She bought new plants, began inviting Anna and a few close friends over, and completely redesigned her office, where everything had previously reminded her of her work with Marcus. Now it was a bright, minimalist space with a huge drawing table overlooking the garden. About a month after the charity evening, Alan came to her with a huge folder full of documents. "I'm not here as a man to a woman, but as a client to an architect," he said seriously, sitting down opposite her at the kitchen table. "Do you remember your speech? It had the effect of a bombshell. Over the past week, the foundation had received a record amount of donations. We can do more than just buy new equipment. We can realize our ultimate dream, to build a separate rehabilitation center." He looked at her excitedly. "It shouldn't just be a building. It should be a space of hope, a place where people will come after difficult treatment to restore not only their bodies, but also their souls. A place full of light, air, and nature. A place where the architecture itself becomes part of the therapy. And I don't know of any architect in the world who could handle this task better than you." Eva looked at him and caught her breath. It wasn't just a job offer. It was the highest act of trust and recognition. He was offering her the chance to turn her personal story, her metaphors from her blog, into something tangible, into stone and glass. Alan, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he replied simply. "Build them a home, Eva. The same one you built for yourself." From that day on, Eva's life took on a new, incredibly powerful momentum. She threw herself into her work, but it wasn't the frantic activity she had used to drown out her pain a year ago. It was a pure, creative flight. She worked 12 hours a day but didn't feel tired. She drew sketches, created three-dimensional models, and studied the experience of the best rehabilitation centers in the world. Her project was bold and innovative. She designed a building that seemed to embrace a large inner garden, blurring the boundaries between interior and nature. There were no long hospital corridors, only bright flowing spaces, panoramic windows, a winter garden under a glass roof, and a small library with a fireplace. Every detail was thought out from the perspective of someone who had gone through hell and was learning to enjoy simple things again. A ray of sunshine on the wall, the sight of a blossoming tree, silence. Alan became her main collaborator. In the evenings, they pored over drawings together, arguing about materials and layout. He brought his deep understanding of patients' needs to the project, and she clothed his ideas in perfect architectural form. In the process of this collaboration, they grew closer, learning to understand each other without words. Once, while sorting through old archives on her computer, she accidentally stumbled upon a folder with photos from her and Marcus's last vacation. She opened one of the pictures. They were standing on the deck of a yacht, smiling, beautiful, tanned, carefree, just a year and a half ago. Ava looked at this photo for a long time, at herself, the old her, and felt nothing but a light, bright sadness, like when looking at an old, long-read novel. She didn't delete the folder. She just closed it and returned to the blueprints of her new, real future. 2 months later, the project was ready. Eva defended it before the Foundation's Board of Trustees. She spoke confidently and passionately, and the board, made up of pragmatic businessmen and financiers, listened to her with bated breath. They saw before them not just drawings, but a dream embodied in lines and shapes. The project was accepted unanimously. That evening, when the official confirmation arrived, Alan came to her with a bottle of champagne. "Congratulations, Chief Architect," he said, filling the glasses. "Today you gave hope to thousands of people." They stood by the huge window in her living room and looked at the lights of the city at night. "Ava, we have to celebrate this properly," he said, turning to her. "Tomorrow. I'll book a table at the best restaurant in town. You'll wear your most beautiful dress, and we'll celebrate the beginning of our first joint project, and the beginning of everything else." Ava smiled and nodded. "I know which dress I'll wear." The construction of the Rehabilitation Center, which the press had already dubbed the House of Light, began with a symbolic groundbreaking ceremony. Unlike the lavish city events, this occasion was quiet and almost intimate. Only the members of the Board of Trustees, a few journalists from specialized publications, and the future team of the center were present. Eva, dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, stood next to Alan and felt at home. She was no longer a victim or a miraculously healed patient. She was the chief architect, the author of a project that was about to come to life. When she was given the floor, she did not make a long speech. She simply said that every building has a soul, and she hoped that the soul of this place would be woven from light, tranquility, and the belief that after the darkest night, dawn always comes. Her words, spoken quietly but with tremendous inner strength, made a much greater impression on those present than any grandiose statements. The first weeks of construction were filled with creative energy. Ava practically lived on the construction site. Wearing a hard hat and work boots, she supervised every stage from morning to night, from marking the foundation to choosing the shade for the facade panels. She spoke to the builders in their language, earning the sincere respect of the tough men in hard hats. She wasn't just a pretty woman with blueprints, she was a professional who knew her business down to the smallest detail. Alan often came to see her after work at the clinic, bringing a thermos of hot tea and sandwiches. They sat on concrete blocks amid the noise of working machinery and discussed the past day. These moments, filled with simple human closeness, were more precious to Eva than any romantic dinner. However, the idyll could not last forever. Any large project is not only about creation, but also about struggle. The first serious obstacle arose from where it was least expected. On the edge of the site allocated for construction, there was a small, neglected park that local residents had long used for walking their dogs. Legally, it was part of the construction site, but a group of local activists, led by an elderly and very energetic lady named Mrs. Harrington, decided that this was an infringement of their rights. A scathing article appeared in the local newspaper under the headline, "Heartless Businessmen Build Elite Clinic on the Site of the Only Green Island." The article was full of inaccuracies and outright lies, but it did its job. The first protesters appeared at the construction site fence with placards. The Foundation's Board of Trustees became nervous. They did not need a scandal. At an emergency meeting, one of the board members, a pragmatic banker named Mr. Davis, proposed the simplest solution. "We must sue them for libel and call the police to disperse this crowd," he said emphatically. "We are acting within the law, and they have no right to interfere with construction." Alan wanted to object, but Ava beat him to it. She stood up calmly and addressed the board. "I think that would be a huge mistake. We are building a center that is supposed to help people, and we can't start construction by waging war against people, even if they are wrong. I would like to speak with Mrs. Harrington and her supporters myself." Mr. Davis snorted skeptically. "Do you seriously think you can change their minds? These people don't want to listen. They want a scandal." "I think they want to be heard," Eva replied firmly. "Let me try." The meeting took place 2 days later in a small room at the local community center. The air was thick with tension. Mrs. Harrington and a dozen of her supporters looked at Eva with open hostility. They had expected to see a cold businesswoman in an expensive suit, spouting legal jargon. Eva arrived alone with a large roll of blueprints under her arm. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater. "Good afternoon," she began, unfolding a huge sheet of the master development plan on the table. "I'm not going to talk to you about laws and permits. I want to talk to you as an architect and as a resident of this city. I understand your concerns. You are afraid of losing your park. Let's see what we can do together." She did not make excuses. Instead, she began to talk about her project. She showed them sketches of an interior garden that was 3 times the size of their park. She explained how the building was designed to preserve as many of the existing mature trees as possible. "But it will all be behind a high fence," exclaimed Mrs. Harrington. "It will be for rich patients, and we will only be able to look at your walls." "That's where you're wrong," Eva gently objected. She unfolded another drawing. "Look, this part of the garden is adjacent to your homes. The original plan was to have a parking lot here, but I thought that wasn't right. I want to offer you something else. We can create a community herb garden and a small playground here. The foundation will cover all the costs of creating and maintaining it. All residents of the area will be able to care for it and use it. It won't just be a park. It will be a place that we create together." The activists were stunned into silence. They hadn't expected this turn of events. They were preparing for war, and they were being offered cooperation. Are you serious?" Mrs. Harrington asked incredulously. "Absolutely," Eva nodded. "I believe that good architecture should not take away, but add. Let's add beauty to our neighborhood together." This meeting was a turning point. A week later, the protests stopped. What's more, Mrs. Harrington became the project's most ardent supporter, organizing a group of volunteers for the future apothecary garden. Eva won not by force, but through wisdom and empathy, which she could not have imagined a year ago. But as soon as one problem was solved, another, much more serious one, arose. While digging the foundation pit for the main building, the builders encountered quicksand, water-saturated soil that behaved like a viscous liquid. This was a serious engineering miscalculation on the part of the Geological Survey. Construction came to a halt. The main contractor, an elderly and experienced engineer named Mr. Carlson, threw up his hands. "This is a disaster, Miss Stone. The only solution is to drive steel piles around the entire perimeter and pour thousands of cubic meters of concrete. This will completely change the project, not to mention the estimate. The budget will increase by at least a third." That evening, another emergency meeting was held. Mr. Davis was furious. "I told you this site was cursed. Additional costs of this magnitude will simply kill our project. We must freeze construction and look for a new investor." Alan tried to calm everyone down, but the tension in the room was growing. Everyone looked at Eva. She was the chief architect, and this was her area of responsibility. She sat completely calm, twirling a pencil in her hands. When everyone had spoken, she raised her head. "I don't think this is a disaster," she said quietly, but so that everyone could hear her. "I see it as an opportunity." She walked over to the screen displaying the drawing and, with a few quick strokes, sketched a new design over it. "We're not going to fight the water. We're going to let it into our project. We're not going to build an ugly concrete wall. We will create a drainage system that will collect all this water into a single stream. We will channel this stream through an artificial channel across our entire inner garden. We will create small cascades and ponds. The sound of flowing water is one of the best therapies. We will turn an engineering problem into a unique design element." Silence hung in the room. The board members who were unfamiliar with architecture looked at her sketch, trying to understand the essence of the idea. Contractor Mr. Carlson, on the other hand, looked at Ava with undisguised admiration. That's brilliant, he muttered. It will be more difficult, but yes, it's possible. And, according to preliminary calculations, it would even be cheaper than a concrete wall. The decision was made. Ava had won again, turning weakness into strength, a problem into a unique advantage. She spent the next few weeks in her office, almost without sleep, redrawing the plans and creating a new landscape design. Alan supported her as best he could. He made sure she didn't forget to eat, massaged her shoulders when she stayed up late into the night, and just sat silently beside her, letting her know she wasn't alone. Their relationship, tempered by these trials, grew stronger than steel. One evening, when they were having dinner at her house, Anna's phone rang. She talked to someone for a few minutes, then looked at Ava with a strange expression. It was Kate, our mutual friend. She ran into Marcus at a bar today. Ava froze with her fork in her hand. She hadn't heard a word about him since that day. And? She asked as calmly as she could. Well, he wasn't alone. He was with that blonde woman. Kate says they had a terrible fight. He looked unhappy and kind of lost. And then he saw Kate, came over and, well, he asked about you. What did he ask? How you were? What was going on with you? He saw an article in the newspaper about your rehabilitation center. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life and wanted to talk to you, to ask for forgiveness. Kate gave him my number, but I said I would pass it on to you and you could decide for yourself. A year ago, those words would have broken her heart. Now she felt only a slight twinge of phantom pain and cold pity. She looked at Alan, who was watching her intently and silently. Tell Kate to tell him we have nothing to talk about. I have nothing to forgive him for. I'm even grateful to him. Let him live his life and I'll live mine. She calmly picked up her fork and continued eating. The door to the past, which she had once thrown out of her house along with his suitcase, was now locked from the inside, and she was the only one who had the key. At the end of the week, Eva was interviewing for the position of her assistant. A young woman, almost a girl, entered the office with shining eyes and a folder filled with very talented but slightly chaotic sketches. The girl was terribly nervous and spoke incoherently, but every word she uttered revealed her mad love for architecture. Ava looked at her and saw herself 10 years ago, just as obsessed, uncertain, but full of ideas. You don't have much experience, Ava said, closing her portfolio, but you have something they don't teach in schools. You have soul, you're hired. The young architect named Sarah looked at her with such enthusiasm that Eva couldn't help but smile. She realized that her own journey, her rebirth, now gave her the strength not only to build buildings, but also to help others build their own futures. She was becoming a mentor. Work on the center was in full swing. The soil problems had been solved, and the conflict with the residents had been resolved. Late one evening, Eva and Alan climbed onto the roof of the main building under construction. The city spread out below them, shining with millions of lights. The construction site was flooded with light from spotlights. Look, Alan said quietly, putting his arm around her shoulders. How beautiful. And it's all thanks to you. Thanks to us, she corrected, pressing herself against him. One architect, even the most brilliant, cannot build anything alone. He always needs someone who believes in him. They stood silently for a long time, looking at the city and their joint creation. It was not just a building. It was a symbol of their shared victory, a symbol that something much more durable, meaningful, and beautiful could be built on the ruins of their old life. I love you, Ava, Alan said. And I love you, she replied. And in those simple words was everything. The pain they had endured, the strength they had gained, and the promise of a long, happy life that they would build together, brick by brick. They sat at the best table in the restaurant, and Ava felt completely happy as she looked at Alan and listened to his story about a funny incident at the clinic. The evening was the perfect end to a stressful but incredibly productive week. When her eyes met Marcus's across the room, the world froze for a moment. She saw the shock on his face, saw him turn pale, and felt not malice, but only cold satisfaction at the completeness of the picture. The past that had tormented her for so long was now sitting at a distant table, looking confused and pathetic. With a barely perceptible smile to him, she turned to Alan just as his phone rang. "Sorry, it's from the clinic." "It's urgent. I have to answer," he said apologetically, getting up from the table. "I'll be back in a couple of minutes." Eva nodded, watching him head for the exit. She took a sip of wine and looked back at Marcus's table. He was talking quickly to his companion, who looked at him with confusion. Then he stood up decisively and headed straight for her. Eva's heart didn't flutter. She waited calmly, watching him approach. He looked worse than she remembered. There were shadows under his eyes, and his movements had a nervousness that hadn't been there before. "Eva," he said, stopping at her table, at her. His voice was hoarse. "Can I sit down for a minute?" She silently pointed to Alan's chair. He sank into it as if his legs had given way. "You look incredible," he stammered, not knowing where to start. "Just incredible. I've seen the articles about you, about the center. It's amazing." "Thank you, Marcus," she replied evenly. He swallowed, gathering his thoughts. His gaze wandered over her face, her haircut, her dress, as if he were trying to find something in her that reminded him of the woman he had abandoned. "Listen, I know no words can change this, but I had to say it. I regret what I did every day, every single day. I was a weak, scared idiot. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake." Eva looked at him without the slightest trace of anger, her gaze more like that of a doctor studying an interesting but hopeless case. In his words, she heard not remorse, but only self-pity. "Don't feel sorry for yourself, Marcus," she said quietly but clearly. "Your leaving was the best thing that could have happened to me." He looked at her in shock. "What? How can you say that?" "It's very simple," she continued, her voice ringing with cold steel. "While you were around, I was only half a person, a pretty addition to your successful life. You left, and I was left alone in the ruins, and you know what? You made me find strength I never knew I had. You made me rebuild myself from the ground up. Without you, I would never have become who I am today. So thank you. Sincerely." At that moment, Alan returned to the table. He saw the tense scene, but his face remained completely impassive. He simply stood next to Eva, putting his hand on her shoulder. Marcus looked at Alan, then at Eva, and finally slumped. All his feigned determination evaporated. "Alan, let me introduce you," Eva said with a light, almost social smile. "This is Marcus, an old acquaintance of mine. Very nice to meet you." Alan nodded politely. Marcus, completely crushed by her calmness, her strength, her new world in which he had no place, muttered something indistinctly, got up, and, without looking back, walked back to his table. Eva watched him go, then took Alan's hand. Their fingers intertwined, and the look they exchanged was one of complete understanding. The past no longer had any power over her. It had just surrendered completely and irrevocably. They were among the last to leave the restaurant. The cool night air pleasantly cooled their heated skin. They walked in silence, hand in hand, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. Eva felt calm and peace fill her to the brim. The scene in the restaurant did not upset her. On the contrary, it became the last missing piece in the picture of her new life, the final chord in a long-played drama. It was him. She broke the silence as they approached the embankment. The man who didn't sign up for this. She said it without bitterness, simply stating a fact. Alan stopped, and, turning to her, gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions or offer any trite words of comfort. He looked very foolish, was all he said, and a warm smile flashed in his eyes. Then he squeezed her hand tighter, and they walked on. That simple gesture said it all: support, acceptance, and boundless trust. Their relationship, which had grown out of a partnership in the fight against death and been tempered by the difficulties of a large construction project, had now gained even greater depth. They weren't just lovers. They were allies who knew the true value of life and each other. Eva suddenly realized that she didn't need a millionaire doctor as her knight in shining armor. All this time, she had been saving herself. She just needed someone who believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. A man who didn't try to shield her from pain, but reached out and offered to walk this path together, as equals. Alan didn't save her. He simply reminded her how to fight for herself, how to build, how to live. And the love that blossomed between them was not a reward for her suffering. It was a natural, organic continuation of her new life, which she had found with such difficulty, but which was all the more precious for that. 6 months passed. The huge, light-filled hall of the International Architectural Forum was overflowing. On stage, against the backdrop of a large screen showing photos of the House of Light under construction, stood Eva. She was the keynote speaker and headliner of this prestigious event. She told her story, but it was no longer the story of a patient. It was the story of an architect who applied professional principles to building her own life. She did not talk about illness, but about strength of spirit. Not about suffering, but about creation. About how important it is to find a new project when the old one has collapsed, and how to turn your greatest vulnerability into your strongest foundation. Thousands of eyes looked at her with admiration, and her calm, confident voice instilled hope in people. At opposite ends of the hall, 2 men were watching her. Alan sat in the front row. He looked at the woman he loved, his face glowing with boundless tenderness and pride. He saw before him not just a brilliant professional, but the living embodiment of a miracle that he had been fortunate enough to touch. Far away in the gallery, almost in the shadows, stood Marcus. He had somehow gotten a ticket to this forum, and was now looking at the woman shining on stage, whom he once called his wife. His face was etched with bitter regret and a belated painful realization of the incredible treasure he had lost because of his own cowardice. After finishing her performance to thunderous applause, Eva politely answered a few questions and stepped down from the stage. Ignoring the journalists and colleagues who tried to stop her, she crossed the entire hall and walked straight up to Alan. He stood up, took her by the hand, and without a word, they walked toward the exit. They left together, holding hands, not the saved and the savior, not the patient and the doctor,